My name is James Brightman. I've been in editorial for almost 2 decades. I'm leading editorial on Casual Connect now, which is, as you may have heard, merging with the Game Daily website. And in the Disneyland August show will be called Game Daily Connect. Thought that Ru would be a perfect candidate to help us kind of on this mission of broadening out and kind of bringing in all aspects of the industry. And Ru, if you're not familiar, has a really interesting background. He founded Ready at Dawn in 2003. Has made some amazing portable titles back in the day, kind of ahead of his time. Was almost the PSP was kind of a little bit like the Switch in a way, because gave you that kind of high processing power in a portable. And he made Daxter and God of War, and then he moved on to consoles and did an Okami port, and has now been working in VR with Lone Echo on Oculus, which has been very, very popular. So why don't we start, kind of with your kind of passion for games in the industry, and sort of on that personal note, like what drew you into this industry and how did you get into game development?
Long story, so I'll try to make it short. I started off actually not in games per se. I was an artist. I wanted to draw. I was studying to be a car designer, but circumstances brought me to basically finish my school. I was a huge fan of not just car design, but entertainment design. Wanted to go work in the movie industry at the time, and I had this kind of chance meeting with one of the original artists from Star Wars, from the 1978, the original Star Wars, Neil Rogers Romero, who actually designed Slave One and all. And I got to know him, got to have him see my portfolio, and he's the one who kind of like pushed me to kind of go interview in different places. I ended up by basically interviewing at Blizzard. My first job back in the 90s, working on StarCraft as my first game, which was, couldn't have asked for a better way to start. And since then, it's been, StarCraft, Warcraft 3, World of Warcraft, started the company, and it's been a kind of an amazing ride, actually, I have to say.
Yeah, it's a really cool background for sure. Every game developer loves being able to create their own IP, and that's sort of, that's the heart of what you guys are doing. So, did you feel like kind of cutting your teeth on some of those earlier days on the PSP when you're working on the existing franchises like God of War or Daxter? These are not, your IP to begin with, but you did some really cool things with them. Was that a good way to a good path for your career? Is that something you'd recommend for other developers out there?
Yeah, actually, I mean, to each his own, but for us, really, it was important to know that when we started the company, we had multiple challenges. There was the challenge of actually starting a company, the challenge of building a team around that, brand that you want to build as a company, technology. You have all these hurdles basically in front of you that you have to one way or the other tackle in order to make a game. And for us, we definitely felt that we had the strength to build an IP, but that using an existing IP to actually build the team around was going to be a better attraction point for us personally. So yeah, Daxter actually was because Naughty Dog were friends of ours. Jason Rubin, who was running Naughty Dog at the time, kind of suggested, like, you guys should do something with this. So that evolved directly to God of War. So it was a natural evolution for us to use those IPs, but definitely it was one of those things where it felt easier in one sense to use that actually as a constant so that we could tackle all the other problems. And of course, it took us about actually a little more than 6 years to start our own IP with the Order 1886, which was really our first IP.
Right. And so you guys have had a lot of success, and you've continued to grow. You have a satellite studio in Portland, correct?
Yes.
And so, the thing that I've appreciated is that, you're one of the few kind of large independent studios, as this industry is sort of getting a bit away from, the middle class, and you have, fewer and fewer studios that can grow to that size without being acquired. And so, I guess what has been sort of the key to success for your studio, as you've continued to evolve over these last, 15 or so years?
I would tell you, key to success for us has been, honestly, simple answer, it's our team. It's the people. It's been, kind of interesting to see how we've evolved. So we started with 3 people. We're about 140, I want to say, right now. And, the choice always comes to you to stay independent. Do you want to basically keep making your own decision, taking the risks? And it's not an easy path. I think the last 10, 15 years has definitely shown us that it's not an easy path. Most of the people that I know that started at the same time as I did sold their companies. We're one of the few left that are still independent. But what was amazing was that throughout all of this, the reason why we stayed independent was because of the people.
Right.
We got people that had certain passions, and we always felt that those passions could be really only fulfilled by us making our own decisions right now. That doesn't mean for the future that's going to be any a different decision. But right now, the decisions we made, the shifts we made, we've been around for, again, like 16 years. We've made 10 different genre of games, which is not common for a studio. Usually, you get really good at something, whether it's a third-person shooter, an action-adventure game, a strategy game. You usually get good at it, and you replicate that over the years. For us, I've talked to you actually in the past about development ADD.
We have talked a lot.
We have talked a lot over the years. We started off on a platformer. We decided from a platformer to basically make a third-person action game, combat game, actually, Melee. We went from there to more of an RPG, with Okami and the port. We moved from that to a third-person shooter, which was a story-driven third-person shooter. We went into arena combat. We've gone into VR experiences and story-driven VR experiences. We've gone into eSports as well. But all of those decisions were actually made because we had the liberty to make them. I don't think had we been, kind of under the umbrella of a bigger company, we would have probably needed to perfect the craft that we built originally. Doing all of those different things meant that the studio also grew by bringing a lot of different people. We have people coming from every walk of life for different types of reasons. Some people love first person, third person, casual games even. And that kind of path that we've taken has allowed us to grow a team that has been amazing. And like I said at the beginning, the thing that made us go and survive and thrive has been people. It's not been the games. I mean, the games are great, but really the people that we go to work with every day is like the best thing that I could ever ask for.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into the next question, which it's basically about company culture and diversity and work-life balance, and these are all critical issues when you're founding a studio and continuing to grow a studio. So, you mentioned having a diverse background of people working at your company, but how have you, looked to kind of make sure everything is properly balanced for that, and also just, with all the aspects of crunch that you hear in the AAA business, I mean, how have you managed to deal with work-life balance as well?
It's tough. I will tell you that everybody who says that they're never going to have crunch is, not being honest with themselves. The reality is that crunch can be multiple things in our industry, and it's been good and bad in many ways. It brings the best out of people. It can bring the worst out of people too. But one of the things that the reality of crunch is that you do it for passion. You should never basically impose it on people. One thing we have done with the company, we've told everyone that comes in is like, we'll never impose anybody to stay longer than they need to. If you love what you do, we do it for the passion, and sometimes your hours just don't count. You just stay there because you want to finish something or you want to perfect something, and that really is what game making takes. It's an art form, and an art form is hard to basically just put between two in and out hours. You really have to basically give it your all and allow time for it to become what it is, and that's how art has always been. So for us, that part of kind of cultivating our work ethic, the way we work, why we work on different games, has helped with that. The fact that we've switched on different projects means that there's always kind of like that idea that you can do something new and that you're not doing the same thing again and again on like 5 different iterations. And that has been one of the great ways we have kind of cultivated our culture. We also have something actually at the company that really helps us, is that we've built what we call now the Fellowship of the Fun. It's actually representative from every department of the company that cultivate the culture of the company. And we put as much work into that as we do into making games. We try to basically make sure that people understand you are working with somebody that you see day in and day out. You need to communicate with them. You need to basically be able to share easy times with them, barbecues and outings and all that stuff. So we do put a very strong importance on the people and the quality of the people, but the quality of their lives as well in the company.
So the diversity topic that we touched on a second ago, and it's important for the people here, they should know tomorrow we actually have a track devoted to it, so be sure to attend that. But when you look at hiring practices and things within your studio as you grow it, what kinds of diversity message do you kind of adhere to?
we try to basically make sure that we hire from different places. Whether I come from Europe, I grew up basically in Switzerland. My partners were basically, when we started the company, were Italian and French. For us, it was extremely important to basically make sure that we brought that culture to the company itself. That means the ideas behind it, even the fact that I think a lot of studios in the US, kind of work throughout the year, have 2 weeks of vacation. Very early on, we implemented a Christmas week off, because in Europe I was so used to it. It's simple things like that, right? That start like the way your culture goes, and from there you start realizing that in order to basically keep that culture going, you can't just rely on 3 people that come in. So diversity for us meant we started hiring very early on from all over the place internationally. When it was hard to get work permits, we would actually double down on actually helping people come to the US. That took a lot more work than we necessarily needed to do, but it did help the way we thought about things, whether it was diversity in cultures, diversity in genders, diversity in race, whatever it was. For us, it was always kind of like, hey, let's try and figure out if we can find people around the place. So today we advertise really everywhere around the world. We hire, yearly, I would say, at one point we used to hire I would say a third of our people, if not more sometimes internationally. And that has really helped us basically kind of have this tone inside the company that it wasn't just about what the industry was built on, which was a very white male, if I can say, driven
Sure.
industry for a long time. And having that ethic from very early on, from the early 2000s, meant that even as we hired more women in the company, we, as a small company, especially as an independent small company that doesn't have an initiative or a group that cultivates just hiring women, we still have, I want to say, more than 20%, 25% women in the company. And usually I know that it's much smaller in most development teams. So for us, it is an active part of the way we function, and it also is an active part of the way we make games, because you bring those kind of people in, you make better games. You make games that actually appeal to a broader audience.
Sure, and so that's obviously one lesson for a lot of the studios and developers here, and that's part of being at Casual Connect is about sharing wisdom and knowledge. And so, do you have any other things that you kind of would want to share with the audience, whether it's advice or regrets on things that you would say, hey, don't do this in the past? I mean, you probably don't have too many of those because you've done pretty well, but what kind of lessons from your career would you pass on?
Wow, that's a tricky one. Too many lessons, because I will tell you this, one of the biggest ones is the lessons we've learned, we made out of our mistakes. The lessons I've learned personally, I've made out of a lot of mistakes. It doesn't matter how successful you are. We've celebrated kind of our mistakes in many ways. We've actually sometimes dwell on them a little too long. I think internally some people go hey, let's move on, but we really do analyze the things that we did wrong with every game that we've done, every decision we've made. So I mean, one of the biggest advices I can give to anybody who wants to start a company, number one, don't do it. And if you can hear it enough times and you still want to do it, then do it. Because it is much harder to basically keep it going. It's fun to start. It becomes kind of all-consuming when the first few years go by, because you need to cultivate not only your culture, but you need to take care of people. Your developers become your family, and it puts a huge burden on you. But definitely the mistakes, you may kind of take time to basically understand them, because oftentimes we have a tendency to just look at the mistake, go on, and just ship the game and never think about it again. But we've been very, very kind of good, I want to say, at doing postmortems on everything that we've done to actually affect the way we make games afterwards. And I will tell you, our development process has really changed with every game that we made, and we're still changing it even today, even after 16 years.
Right, and so we have a VR track tomorrow, which unfortunately you're not a part of, but you have made a very successful VR game in Lone Echo, and as you said before, you've delved into eSports as well with Echo Arena.
Yeah.
So you look at those two kind of emerging fields. What kind of knowledge or lessons would you impart to the developers here about VR or eSports, because they're not so easy to get into or to be successful in? Definitely
not. I mean, VR is in its infancy. I think we're a little quick to judge how fast VR should evolve. VR as a high-end market, I would say on the Rift side, on PSVR, it's been around for now about 4 years, I think, right? 2014, 2015, 15 was when it launched. If you look at the leaps that VR has made in 4 years, they're far greater than practically all the new, different aspects of the game industry that have come before that in the last 20, 30, 40 years. So we're impatient right now about how fast VR should go, but we have done quite a lot actually already in a very short amount of time. VR can be amazing because you can learn things that you thought as a gamer you knew, and you kind of go back to school and you learn things all over again. I will tell you with Lone Echo, the very first year of Lone Echo was rough because we had, I had 20 years in the industry by the time I started Lone Echo, but Lone Echo was like being in the industry for the first year because we had to learn how to design for VR very differently than we did for anything else. And that's the same for every platform. For mobile, for handheld, you have to learn to design for what you're making actually on that platform. And the one great thing about VR is that more than anywhere else, it is the most unexplored place in experiences, in entertainment, in interactive, basically entertainment. And we need more people actually exploring it right now. We've been, kind of very lucky with the first game. We won a lot of awards. We were celebrated for Lone Echo. We've now are in our third season of Echo Arena in eSports, and now Echo Combat also in eSports. I would tell you that VR has a long way to go. I mean, we're not even in the 1% of like what we could explore there. So for people who are a little shy about doing it, I would tell you there are partners out there that are willing to listen. We've had an amazing partnership with Facebook and Oculus, and they are always hungry to basically hear more new ideas, and they're always ready to kind of put backing behind things that can change VR and can evolve it.
Sure. And then on the esports side, like what have you learned about that industry? Because that's a tough one to succeed, and you can't just make an esport game. You have to have the community rally around your game, and then hopefully it can actually take off to the esports level, which has happened a little bit for you guys. But how do you see that industry evolving?
Esports is, again, a very tricky beast. You're right, because I think we have certain areas where it's managed, like Overwatch, where there's a league going on. There's some that are more cultivated by the actual gaming, the economy and the community actually around that game. Right now, I think that we still don't know truly what esports is. There's definitely entertainment there. Our part of esport has been a little different, I want to say, because with VR esports, especially with Echo Arena, that is a 3v3 sports game where you play as teams and you play kind of in 0G, you throw frisbee around. It's a lot more athletic and physical than a lot of other esports. That's the side of esports that has been really amazing for us to see. It's been that not just watching the actual action in the game was the interesting part, but it's actually watching the players, having the players actually be on stage, be kind of front and center in front of the public and jumping around and passing discs and all that. It's like watching actual sportsmen, doing this. And I have to tell you, after a 5-minute match, 10-minute match, they are sweating and they're exhausted. And it's awesome to see that side because that's the esports that we know through VR. And for me, I think I've been involved in esports, on the outskirts before with some of the things that Blizzard has done. But it's been a very different way of looking at it for us because VR has brought a different side to it, which is a much more physical, I think, aspects of esports.
Sure. I think we have time for maybe one more question, then we'll open it up to audience questions. So, for you actually a few years back decided to step down from the CEO role, and you had Paul Sams take over. And I'm just wondering, I think, is that something where that was kind of recognizing what you were passionate about and sort of, maybe how to make the company better by having someone in a more executive role so you could focus on the creative side a bit? Or how did that kind of play out for you in your studio? And do you feel like that actually has made you guys better as a cohesive unit?
So yeah, that was an interesting one. I want to tell, again, for anybody who wants to start a studio out there, I think, when you start, actually, it's a lot more organic. Everything that happens and decisions that get taken are easier to take because everybody has your ear. It's a smaller group. As we got bigger, I was torn between creative, writing, designing, even drawing, which was kind of my first passion, and running the company. So I think for about 3-4 years before we hired Paul, I was kind of wondering, can I find somebody? And I was lucky enough that Paul, who was running Blizzard at the time, him and I had a long-standing friendship, and we decided, well, it might be an interesting thing. He wanted to retire from Blizzard. Wasn't still sure that he was going to get out of games, and I took the decision to basically hire him as CEO. But I want to tell you, one thing that was interesting also is that he was only CEO for less than a year. And what I realized through that was that starting a company, whether you like it or not, it's one of the toughest positions to basically give to someone else, especially in the years that you're still growing. Even now that we're 140, we're still growing, is to get somebody to fill in that role. For me, what it did was to see what the company needed actually out of a CEO. Paul was one type of CEO, and he's amazing at what he did for Blizzard and all that. But I also realized that 6 months to a year made me realize what type of CEO our company needed. And I would recommend this to anybody actually who starts a studio out there. Take the break if you have the chance. If you can give that job at least to somebody for like 6 months to a year, please do, because it's refreshing. It kind of gives you a second life. For me, it did exactly that. That 2015 period when you got hired allowed me to step back, analyze the company all over again, step back into it kind of like, even with more energy than I had before. And especially when we're AAAs that way, like there are barely any AAAs left actually that are independent in the industry. You really need to figure out like what you want to do, not what others think you should be doing. We've always actually had this kind of strange kind of relationship. AAAs have had this strange relationship between what they really want to do as an independent and what other publishers want you to do because you're known for something. And that year gave me that break and that distance to decide we know exactly what we want to do. We knew that VR was going to be one pillar of Ready at Dawn. And in the last 2 years actually, we started working on our next AAA title for console. And that has really been that decision that I was able to take, stepping back and kind of like jumping back in with both feet.
Okay, great. Well, if anyone in the audience has questions, now is the time.
Hi. I was wondering, just with sort of the experimental side of your company, because you make quite a variety of games, as you said, do you prototype and throw away a lot, or do you sort of take a theme and just keep going at it until it's refined and what you were looking for?
We prototype a lot. You have to actually, and prototyping, by the way, can be anything. For us, prototyping goes from a drawing to a paper design to something that you want to make in game. You can use whatever engine you want. Sometimes we tell people like, hey, if you want to do something we own our own technology, right? And every one of our games is made in our tech. But we always tell them, don't ever be bound by the things that you think are the tools that we have and that some people might have. So we do prototype in everything. The other thing that I would tell you that really helps us, that I would also recommend to anybody out there at any studio, is that we do game jams. And game jams are basically a week that we take off. We do it twice a year, once after you come back from Christmas vacation, so that week right after Christmas, and 1 week right around the middle of the year, around July. And during those weeks, people know ahead of time that this is happening, and they are allowed to do whatever they want for like that week. That means that they can do it alone. They can just partner with somebody else. The last game jam, we had, I think, 20 people practically partner to make one single game. Those game jams actually have spawned games that we've now developed. Echo Arena actually came out of a game jam. Echo Combat came out of a game jam. One of the ideas that came out of the last game jam in January most likely will make it into a game actually in the future. So when it comes to us prototyping, we involve everybody. We tell anyone, doesn't matter if you've been here for a year or for 15 years, you have every right to basically throw an idea into the pool. And if that makes it, and that's what we did even when we jumped into VR. We asked everyone in the studio, it was kind of mandatory. We told everybody, pitch something. And they all at least pitched a one-page document. And some of the ideas that ended up in Lone Echo came out from that. We want to make sure that everybody has ownership of the games that we do.
Thank
you. You started out by saying how important your team is to you and in growing and building and sustaining your company. It seems that the trend nowadays is to do a lot more outsourcing. Have you ever been involved in outsourcing, and what do you see as the pros and cons versus outsource versus in-house and the risks and so on?
That's that's a very good question, because it's a struggle that we're still having today. The way we've outsourced is that we've partnered with people that we've known for about 8, 9, 10 years, individuals all around the world. If we find somebody who's really good but they don't want to move from where they are, we kind of give them a full-time kind of contract thing. We tell them like, hey, if you're available, we'll use your time. And we've done that with a bunch of people all around the world, and we'll keep doing that, I'm pretty sure. Outsource has been kind of bittersweet for us. We've used outsourcing in the past. It's not worked out too well. we craft a lot of things, and I think at a fault we craft it a little too much. We're trying to unlearn that and try to force people to go like, hey, it's okay to let something go outside, and it's not going to be exactly what you want, but it's going to help the game. So we're still learning that. I mean, I'm telling you, like, I'm one of the worst offenders when it comes to that stuff, running the company, because sometimes I'm the most critical of some of the things that we do. But you're right about outsourcing. We are making games, especially AAA right now. We're making games that take, we're 140 right now. The order, for example, was done with the internal team was about 110, I want to say. At the time, teams outside were upwards of 200, 250 people, so way smaller than the next closest, smallest team. GTA was already using 500 to 1,000 people. Today, without 250 people, you can't make a good AAA title out there, it seems. And for us, I want to say it is a huge struggle. We know where we're going. We are trying to do that by opening like a studio like we did in Portland. We have about 10 people now in Portland. So for us, outsourcing might mean satellite studios, maybe starting studios around the world. And it's almost insourcing that way, that you do that way. Right now, outsourcing is still, I want to say, a struggle, not just for us. I've talked to other teams as well. And they're split. They're split between what they really consider outsourcing. A lot of Sony teams do insourcing, for example, with some of their internal groups in San Diego, for example, and all that. So right now, it's still a question we need to answer.
Thank you so much.
Big round of applause for Ru, please.